driving around the country, as evidenced by so many of the behaviors that are being reported. So America's going to have to make up its mind. What does it want to do in terms of dealing with this problem? It can be dealt with. We've dealt with it in the past, in the 70s, in the 90s, as recently as 2018. Safest year in the history of New York City was 2018. That was only 5 years ago. Fortunately, it's starting to trend down again, but the challenge is going to be to keep it going down. That's where the leadership comes in.
Commissioner, as you mentioned, you don't have to go far. You go into a CVS or a Duane Reade and see everything's locked up. Almost everything's locked up. You've got to get somebody to come help you get things because of the shoplifting problem, and you're effectively asking somebody who works a register at Duane Reade to become a police officer in some way and stop people from committing crimes. What do police officers that you talk to in New York City, but also across the country, what tools do they need to help put a stop to some of this?
Well, the problem is many of the tools that I had when I was a young cop in the 1970s have been taken away. New York City, for example. New York City emphasizes civil summonses for shoplifting, fear evasion, public urination. A civil summons, which the majority of people who get them don't show up, don't pay the fine, basically throw them away. We are no longer allowed to arrest for a lot of those offenses.
Why not?
To give a criminal summons. Ask our city council, ask our legislature in Albany. This is true throughout America, that we have. Senator Moynihan many years ago took a lot of criticism for a comment he made about defining social deviancy down, redefining norms of behavior down. We are excusing away so much of the behavior that, if left unaddressed, becomes more criminal, more serious over time. And that's what we're facing right now. We are not addressing the root causes of crime, which are these minor crimes that are not being addressed.
So, Cedric, from your point of view, where does the problem lie, and how do we reverse this trend where we've seen it across the country, and not just at high-end, they'll get all the attention, not just at high-end department stores where people just walk in, clean the place out while nobody does anything about it, but at smaller shops too, at bodegas in New York City, and small business owners are being hurt by all of this. Where does the problem start, and what do we do about it?
I made a suggestion the other day that you need to slime them. Whenever there's a group of people, and the only problem with sliming is that you would slime some of the innocent bystanders that would be in the store at the same time. But if you had some way or another to where either some smoke or some sort of material would be hosed on these people that was doing this, kind of like ink. You know, if somebody robs a bank, they got those ink devices in there that'll blow up and it cause all the paper, the green money to become red or yellow or pink or whatever. That if you had something like that you could slime them as they was going out the door, even if it was a smoke type slime, to where once that got on their clothes and in their hair and in their skin, that it would take for Jesus to be able to get it out. In the meantime, you got these people running down the road that's yellow or red, and you know good and well that they just got through doing something that was illegal because they've been slimed. And I know that whenever I say slime, it reminds people of Ghostbusters, but it ain't got nothing to do with Ghostbusters. It's got to do with marking somebody in the act. That way you can pursue them on the streets and maybe apprehend your Gucci whatever back, or your Rolex watch that they just got through stealing from some of your cabinets or something. There has to be a way to be able to mark these people whenever they're involved in doing those things. That way, your police officers will come near being able to catch them. Besides that, whenever you slime them that way, you're also sliming the product. That way, once the information gets out there, hey, if you got this purse and it looks like it's got red slime on it or some sort of a dye to it, don't buy it, because odds are it was stolen. If there was a way that you could do that towards the people going out of the store, I think that you would probably, you may not stop it completely, but you would at least halter some of it that's going on. Because I've never seen people act in groves like this towards going in working in numbers and being able to go in and basically take out $1 million worth of merchandise just within a matter of a couple minutes. But that's what they're doing. That's exactly what they're doing. And there has to be a way of stopping it. Kind of like if you buy an automobile now and you don't make the payments, well, because of everything electronically, you can basically hit the button and shut off some sort of a control module inside the computer in the car, and now your car won't crank. In other words, your car becomes dormant. Same way with housing industry. If you had some way or another of opening up some containers inside the house to where the house was basically like a skunk smell, you wouldn't have to worry about running them out with a warrant. You can run them out with the smell. All you have to do is the people that owns the house or the banking institutions, the finance institutions, all they have to do is press a button. It would open up this valve, and the next thing you know, this horrible, horrible smell inside the house would run the people out of the house. They couldn't no longer occupy the house. Of course, you'd have to have a way of deactivating that smell once you got them people out. That way you could sell it to whoever wanted to buy that house. But if there was a way that you could enlarge something like that inside of a home, don't you think that would help? Because some of these people that refuses to pay their payments, it can take some of the owners as much as 6 months to finally get them out of there. And in some cases, where they're homesteading out in California, I guess there's some cases where you can't run them out. It's unbelievable how corrupted our laws have become. And you actually got to outsmart the smart. It's unbelievable. And how corrupt that our lawyers and our judges has allowed for this to get out of hand. Much less what they're talking about right here. Listen to what they're talking about, because this is a very, very crucial subject that could be coming, just as the Walmart slogan, near a neighborhood near you. Please listen.
Well, Commissioner Bratton is right. I certainly do agree with him. This is a leadership issue, but it's not just a leadership issue within the police department itself, that is going through a generational transition, if you will, where you have a lot of older chiefs that are going out. You have younger chiefs that are coming up. They don't have the support they oftentimes have once had, because every 2, 4, 8 years you have a change in leadership of elected officials who have a different philosophy of view or responding to the will of the community, what is best around public safety. The challenge here is really, really much more broad than we have time on this show to talk about. But I will say this, I think one of the important things that any community at this very moment needs to consider, that is seeing this trend, this uptick, if you will, in crime that is just so brazen, is that there's going to have to be some real action taken where there's concrete consequences that will result in a lot of this violent activity that we see that's taking place, Willie.
Yeah, Claire McCaskill, by the way, it's at the top of the hour. You're watching Morning Joe. We're going to be talking about the Republican Party bringing impeachment charges, or at least an impeachment inquiry against President Joe Biden, the impact on the Biden administration and on the Republican Party. And in the election next year, also, David Ignatius is going to be with us. He wrote an op-ed that certainly has Washington, D.C. talking this morning, official Washington all talking, saying that Joe Biden has done a great job. And now it's time for him and Kamala Harris to step down and open up the process. We're going to have that discussion very soon. We're talking right now, though, about crime waves in Washington, D.C. and other parts of the country, and what's happening and what's gone wrong over the past couple of years. I'm so glad that Commissioner Bratton brought up the fact that in 2018, crime was at an all-time low in New York City. I remember reading the New York Times article that said they had to go back to the 1950s to try to estimate what year may have been as safe in New York City as 2018. Now they lock up toothpaste in Duane Reade stores. Claire, I think this is a thing that for most Americans, it's just so shocking. Small business owners having things thrown through the glass windows and people just going in, stealing stuff. People walking in to drugstores, just taking things out. Nordstrom's being chased out of major cities because there are all these smash and grabs. People running into stores, stealing tens of thousands of dollars of merchandise and nobody's stopping them. And a story I heard yesterday, small business owners leaving central Philadelphia and one grocery store closing up because the owner said people would just walk in the store, they would grab donuts, they would pour coffee, and then they would leave the store without paying. And it happened. They would go in, they would get milk, they would get bread, they would get whatever. And the poll is, and it's just like what Cedric said, there has to be consequences. The poll quote from the Washington Post yesterday that really struck me is, there don't seem to be any consequences. Claire, how did we fall so far so fast where people can just rob stores and nobody seems to give a damn?
I'm going to go back to the renter or the homeowner, the mortgage owner. If they was afraid about the smell, they could always do something with sound. You could create a humming in the apartment. The only problem with that would be that the apartment right next to that apartment may actually hear that sound too as well. So let's violate that ideal. Let's go to another ideal, which is probably the best ideal. You could fix your electronical service box on an electrical, monetary, digital grid to where whoever was in control of that home, it didn't matter if it was the mortgage holder, it didn't matter if it was the landlord that was renting out the apartment, to where all they had to do was press a button at their own disposal, or maybe you'd have to have a key to where you'd have to go to the apartment or go to the home and actually turn this key. But you could disconnect the services to where that home or that apartment would no longer be functionable towards having electrical grid juiced up to it. And you would have to make it a law to where all states would have to conform with this law together, to where no electrical company could go in and modify this around that or manually turn something on after it had been turned off by the owner until after it had been approved by the owner. There's so many cases that I'm hearing of horrifying stories, especially out west, where people basically are just doing whatever that they want to do. The criminals have taken over, and this is actually a mockery to our law to be able to maintain order for the citizens that are trying to work in above and beyond being a criminal. Now you got to look at the other factor of it, that our politicians, the baby boomers, those that was in control of all this stuff, they have let this get out of hand the way that it is. I realize that that's hindsight. There's nothing we can do about it at this point in time, but I'm just letting you know that the fault lies upon the feet of those that allowed for this to get in the shape that it's in, and now it's going to be up to us to wiggle, work, squirm, and fight our way out of all this, because it has become a horror nightmare in a lot of people's lives. And to think that our government has failed us this way is appalling. It's absolutely appalling. So there's more ways to do the home invasion thing like I'm talking about, other than a smell that comes out of the walls or whatever that would actually drive them people out of that house. There would be sound. Of course, you couldn't do this on apartments. You couldn't do if you had one apartment linked to another apartment, you couldn't do the smell thing on that. But you could have some sort of electronic digital device, or even manually walk up, turn the key, shut the cap, shut it down to where now that apartment or that house is no longer occupied to be able to have electricity put into it. There would have to be restrictions. Let's say if it was 1,000 degrees outside, you couldn't do it. Or let's say if it was 20 below zero, you couldn't do it. Because now you're talking about human life endangerment purposes. There would have to be restrictions on the homeowner being able to do that, or the finance committee being able to do that. But there has to be some sort of a way to get your point across that you cannot just walk into a store and just go to breaking out stuff and walking out with oodles and gobs of all kinds of furs and jewelry and diamonds and watches and all this other expensive stuff without there being some sort of a consequence involved in it. And you're going to have to get the socialist lobbyist attorneys out of the country. You need to drive them out of the country. Those that want to protect the lawbreaker more than they do the victim. Because if you're forgiving the lawbreaker the rights in having more rights than the victims, well, then that makes you a lawbreaker. Now you become an accessory to the crime. And those people should be charged for the same crime. I think I've said this before pertaining to some of your prosecutors that refuses to prosecute people knowing that they have committed a crime, that in essence, how to get rid of that problem is start charging them with the crime. Start charging them with the same crime. If you're not going to charge these people knowing that they have committed a crime, first of all, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. And second of all, if you can't skin a cat one way, you can skin him another. By now, the charges should be put upon your life too as well, because you let that person go. You let that person get away with what he or she has done, knowing that they should have served some sort of great punishment for what they done. That's what we're seeing in our law. We're seeing our laws become corrupt, either on a county, state, or a federal level. And when it gets to that point, then you have a Wild Wild West show. And whenever it gets to that point, then you have a lawless society. And that's basically the trajectory that America's heading into right now. And you can blame it on whatever you want to blame it on, but the fact of the matter is we are in the center of the storm, and if we don't have good leadership to get us out of that storm, then we're going to continue to suffer and suffer and suffer. And it's just until a matter of time before those sufferings will come to a neighborhood near you, if it hadn't already.
Well, as usual, public policy takes wide swings that usually miss. And what happened was, in a reaction to some police misconduct, blatant and awful police misconduct, and some latent and apparent racism within the ranks of police forces around the country, people overreacted and said what we've got to do is defang the police. In fact, that horrible phrase that was coined for a while, defund the police, which was a stupid, stupid phrase and never should have been uttered by anybody. What really has to happen now is we've got...
I think where that come from was up in Portland, Oregon, whenever they decided to take over a whole city block and use some sort of a fancy word to be able to do so. Whenever we sit back and allow for stuff like that to fester and to start, it's a whole lot harder to put the fire out after the fire is burning than it is to put the fire out before it ever starts. That deal that happened in Portland, Oregon, the way that they took over that town, I think it was Portland, Oregon, and held that town in that esteem for about 2 months before, I guess, national security, not national security, but National Guard had to come in and break it up, was absolutely mind-boggling to sit and see something like that being done right in front of our very eyes, that basically the people that own those stores and the people that own those businesses couldn't do nothing about it.
modulate this and come back to a situation where there are consequences for low-level crime, that you can't walk in and steal and know that nothing's going to happen. But we also have to get back to realizing the problem here is trust. And this is a mixed message on crime rates, Joe. I know this segment this morning is emphasizing increases, but there's many major cities across America that are seeing a downtick in homicides. And one of the reasons that's occurring in some of these cities is what the commissioner knows very well. Some of them are still focused on building trust in these communities so we can get witnesses. The main reason homicide rates spike is because nobody wants to come forward and testify. Nobody wants to be that guy or that woman who points the finger at somebody who has committed a violent crime in their community. They want to keep their head down and hope that they're not a victim. So that's why community policing and community prosecutions are so important. And that's what we did back in the 90s when I was the elected DA in Kansas City. We had a record homicide rate. We went to work putting people in neighborhoods so the people in the neighborhoods got to know them and began to trust them, that they were not out to just hassle their son on the way to work if he had the nerve to drive through a white neighborhood. So there is a whole lot of work that has to be done here. As our guest said, it's way too complicated to get into in one segment. But I do think it's important to remember these crime stats aren't one monolithic issue here. It depends on where you are in the country. And Florida has, I don't want anybody to blame New York. New York still has a much lower crime rate than many southern states, urban centers in the country.
She mentioned Florida at the crime rate. There is a pedophile crime rate in Florida that exceeds all other crimes throughout all other states. And it's self-explanatory, the reason why, because whenever people walk around, basically only, 7% to 5% dressed, and they're flaunting around in front of everybody towards showing themselves, antagonizing or tempting people to want to look at them, there's no doubt you're going to have a higher percentage of rapes and pedophile activity that goes on in a environment like that. To where if you take somebody like up in Russia or Alaska, where you have to walk around dressed all the time, if not, you're going to freeze to death. Your crime rate pertaining to rapes and pedophile crime goes way, way down. How come people can't see that? How come people can't understand that? They can. The fact of the matter is they don't care. But then whenever they wind up getting raped because of somebody that can't resist the temptations, then they want to cry the blues. Oh, I got raped. Well, maybe it was because you kind of brought it upon yourself because you was walking around with provocative clothing on, or maybe even no clothing on, that caused that person to react or respond that way, or help that person to respond that way. People's got limitations in what that they can do and what that they are tempted to do. And whenever you bring that temptation upon to a person, you're basically bringing upon a stumbling block upon that person that person cannot resist. It'd be the same thing if I had $1 million in a suitcase and I dropped it off down here at the road with somebody that I didn't know and say, hey, I'll be back tomorrow to pick it back up. I want to be sure that money's here, okay? Oh, yeah, no doubt, it'll be here. I'm going to bring up another factor. Back in the piracy days, in which I've always been fascinated with pirates, even though a lot of the stuff that they done was brutal and callous and cold and basically barbarians as far as I'm concerned. But even your pirates back in the pirate days was some very crafty, smart people, and they would put like booby traps up, to where if you come close to their gold or their silver or whatever that they had hidden, all of a sudden you suffered the consequences for getting too close. Well, today, if you live out in the country and you set a booby trap up, some sort of a hole or a net or some sort of a cage or a trap, odds are you're probably going to go in front of a judge, even though the home belongs to you, even though you got a right, supposedly a right, to protect your castle. And it doesn't say that you have a right to protect only your inside of your castle, But it says that you have a right to protect your castle, which, as far as I'm concerned, your castle is anything that borders where the property line begins and ends. But if you used to set a booby trap out and capture somebody in a net or a cage, or they dropped off into a hole and they broke an arm or a leg, the next thing you know, the homeowner would be sued, because now you've created harm and hurt to that person because that person was trying to rob you, or that person was trying to do something that he shouldn't have been doing to begin with. Our laws in America are screwed up. That's just like up until just a few years ago, legislation finally passed it to where if you seen somebody have an accident in front of you and you jumped out of the car real quick and you pulled them out of a burning car, the next thing you know, you wound up being sued by that person because that person said, well, if that person didn't pull me out of that burning car, I wouldn't have had these 3 crushed vertebrae in the lower part of my back. Well, odds are they probably had the 3 crushed vertebrae in the lower part of their back during the process of the wreck. But to think that somebody can commit a heroic act like that toward trying to save somebody's life and then be punished because of it, it shows you the idiocy of our laws. To where if you're over in Europe and places like that in other countries, it's the law. If you see somebody have a wreck and you don't pull over to try to assist that person, you can go to jail in those other countries for not helping those people. It's called the Good Samaritan laws. They only changed that back about 10 or 15 years ago, but up until then, you could actually go to jail for the rest of your life for trying to be a good Samaritan and trying to save somebody's life, or wind up being sued, and the next thing you know, everything that you've worked for and everything that you've tried to gain in life wound up getting taken from you. It goes back to your lobbyist, worthless judges and your lobbyist, worthless attorneys that have gotten in behind all this stuff, kind of like your ambulance chasers, some of the most sorriest freaking people in the world, as far as I'm concerned, that want to panhandle off of the grief and the despair of others. And that's exactly what Dick Cheney done years ago whenever Katrina hit down there, that caused him to go from the value of $4 million whenever he first started running for office to the point that whenever he left office during Bush's era for 8 years, he was valued at well over $40 million. In addition to what that they was doing towards the country, paying our military people to insert force in blowing up a building or blowing up a bridge, and then the next thing you know, here come Dick Cheney with his company that the American people had to pay to build it back. How idiotic can our laws or can our politicians do and get away with without us resisting and fighting back? In a way, I don't blame society for reeking or reaching out or screaming out because of the illegitimacies that the baby boomers have done toward basically selling us downstream, and all our jobs basically shutting down here in America because your retail stores could all of a sudden get a 32-inch TV coming from Japan or Hong Kong or wherever at a third of the price of what we could build it right here in America. Once more, America got the cart in front of the horse whenever they decided to engineer a computer and start bringing things on board globally versus only picking and choosing towards who it wanted to compete with. Because during the smokestack industry after World War II, America was doing great. We was number one in everything up until long about the 80s, whenever here come Ronald Reagan and his Star Wars program, and here come the computer system that was right at the heels of fixing to be dumped into the laps of the American people. The United States governments, or the governments in general, and the military, they had access to that material first. They usually always have access to whatever's coming on board about 20 years before society gets a hold of it. So our military and our governments had already established this establishment towards keeping it in-house, and it wasn't until they decided to break ranks and say, well, you know what, let's just give this to the public. And that's whenever you had Elon Musk and all these other people that created all these social media platforms that has now put us where we are today, which is what? Chaotic. Chaos. Total chaos. Because why? Because America started competing on a global level versus only picking and choosing a few different countries that it wanted to compete with. In other words, all of a sudden the boundaries, there was no boundaries, and now all of a sudden your retail stores or your people over here in America, if they chose to want to marketize the market and broaden it out to the point that they could get it from a sweatshop over in South America somewhere or Mexico somewhere that was barely giving those poor children $2 a day or whatever to work in those sweatshops to make them t-shirts and that underwear for people, that our retail stores over here could take advantage of that, and they could buy that product from them, even knowing that those business owners was taking advantage of those poor children the way that they was in those sweatshop industries. But we still went ahead and wore the underwear anyway. We still went ahead and wore the shirts and put on the shoes anyway. So really and truly, it's all of our faults. It's not just the mega retail stores that's done this. It's all of our faults that has set back and allowed for this to occur. Now, the question is this, once more, that's hindsight. Now, where do we go from here as Americans towards wiggling, working, squirming, fighting, getting our way out of this that we've obviously been pushed off into? Well, that's the reason why that we have debates. That's the reason why that people like me want to record shows like this. That way we can bring it all out to the table, and maybe, just maybe, by chance, somebody would take the initiative of doing the proper and right thing. Other than that, my friends, we are digging our holes deeper and deeper and deeper, and if we're not smart enough to work our way out of these holes, we're only going to become saturated with the very environment that we've created for ourselves.
Country, and it is still a very safe place to be. And I've been here for a week, and I feel really safe walking around New York.
You're walking on different streets than I am.
No, well, I mean, I've been in Times Square. I've been, Now, I'm sure there's parts of New York that are not good. That's true in every urban center. But I think it's really dangerous for just to paint with a broad brush here.
Well, so let's not paint with a broad brush. I've said very clearly over the past several days that in many southern cities in Florida, for instance, Jacksonville has a higher crime rate than New York City. It certainly does. But I also know people walking around New York City that have worked there for 30 years say they don't feel safe. The people in D.C. is getting much worse, exponentially worse. I've been in and out of D.C. now for 35 years. D.C. it feels like it did in the early 1990s. It's out of control. I don't care what people say on their little blogs, their little progressive blogs. D.C. is out of control, and they've got a city council that is perfectly fine with that. And Mr. Commissioner, you look at these numbers: crime up 22% in New York City, crime up 11% in L.A. I want to circle back. I want to circle back to what Claire was talking about. Obviously, there was a reaction to the tragedy, the George Floyd murder. But I want to be very clear, and we've just said it. It's just like when progressives think that getting people off the street when it's like 10 degrees and putting them in shelters is somehow not progressive. The rest of America doesn't understand that. And also, the big lie is that defunding the police is somehow going to help people of color. You will remember, Mr. Commissioner, that back in 2020, after the George Floyd murder, you'll remember that you had progressives from places like Park Slope and Brooklyn Heights saying defund the police. And you had people representing some of the districts where the truly disadvantaged live and said, no, we need more cops. We need more cops in our schools. We need more cops on the street protecting our children walking to school. We need a larger police presence, because when you see a breakdown in cops, when you see a lot of cops retiring, a lot of cops quitting like they have in Philadelphia and a lot of other cities, it is people of color who are disproportionately impacted. It is people of color who are disproportionately killed. It is people of color who are disproportionately abused. It is people of color who are disproportionately raped. And as we move forward with this discussion and debate, we have got to make that clear to progressives who think defunding the police somehow, as they're sitting in their Starbucks in Park Slope, that somehow that's going to help people of color. Look at the stats over the past 2-3 years. It's done just the opposite.
Joe, two quick thoughts. That a lot of focus on violent crime, but what's creating so much fear in America today, fear in this city, as I pointed out in the op-ed, is the disorder, the increasing disorder, the shoplifting, the aggressive panhandling, prostitution now returning blatantly to the streets of New York. It's what they see every day in the subways and on the streets that's creating the fear. Certainly the violent crime generates concern, but it doesn't happen to most of us, thank God. But what happens every day is the disorder. And that's what we failed to address in the 70s and 80s. We began to address it successfully in the 90s. Ed Koch had a great saying after he lost his last election for mayor. When asked about that defeat, he said, well, the people have spoken, now they must be punished. Well, in many respects, the crime situation and disorder situation in particular we're experiencing right now is that the people have spoken in many cities around the country and have put in progressive politicians and district attorneys who refuse to do anything about the disorder that is creating so much of the fear. So we're going to have to basically kind of go back to a quote by Robert Kennedy that every society, I'm paraphrasing, gets the criminal justice system it deserves. Well, right now that we've created the crises,
Exactly.
the voters, the politicians, can it be fixed? It can be, but boy, it's going to take a lot of work.
You know, during this discussion, this very interesting discussion, this very topical discussion, I'd like to ask both you, Commissioner, and Cedric, I'd like to follow up on what Mr. Bratton says about two words that haven't been mentioned a lot here today. One is enforcement. The other is license. Enforcement meaning that if you're in a two-man cruiser and you go to a crime scene or you get a call and you go, whether it's Madison Avenue or whether it's up in the Bronx, the first thing you look for as a patrol officer getting out of that car is who's going to be there with a cell phone camera? Who's going to be recording my activities? Who's going to be recording whether I handcuff this person? The license aspect of it occurs on the subway. You see the subways filled with people who know instinctively that they now have a license to hassle you, to take your wallet, to try and scare you. They have a license to do it because they will not be arrested. What do we do about those two things?
The resolution of this is political in terms of police have effectively not been allowed to be the police. Many of the tools that they used in the past, in the 90s, beginning of the 21st century, they no longer have. They don't have the power of arrest. For fare evasion, for example, fare evasion now is a civil summons in most instances. The officer cannot arrest, and in many instances cannot search the person for a weapon, etc. So the resolution of this is ultimately going to be, as the same way it was created, political resolution, allowing officers, allowing district attorneys, allowing the courts to effectively deal not only with the serious crime, but the serious crime begins with the minor crime, the tolerance of it. The streets of New York, clear as you're walking, take a look at the streets of New York, all those unlicensed scooters, electric bikes, going every which way, creating chaos. No helmets, no licenses. Why did we allow that to happen? Politics, basically. Now, the resolution of it's going to end up being a political resolution. Police can do it, but they need the tools. It's like asking them to build a house without a hammer to pound the nails.
Cedric, your thoughts?
Well, the reality of it is, in all of this, as much as many things has changed in our society and certainly around policing, I think we're going to have to come to the terms with the fact of this. certain things are not going to change. But policing is going to have to change in this country. A lot of the issues that we're talking about as relates to police has a historic number of events that we all can point to that has changed the direction of policing either for the good or for the worse. But I think it's important to note here, when you talk about enforcement, when you consider the fact what police officers have to be confronted with today, the technology that's out there, the cell phone cameras that's out there, that's not going to change. But let's also remember, police officers also are equipped with body-worn cameras themselves. But I think there's an important piece in all of this is that we're in a very changing environment and we're going to have to make those adjustments. We're not in the 70s, we're not in the 80s, we're not in the 90s. We're in 2023 going forward with less police officers, with less people in our community who are interested in being police officers. So how we police going forward is going to have to be very different. I want to address one thing Joe had brought up earlier about in communities where you have progressives or those that are very much on the left who may say, let's ban policing. There's no need for policing. If you look at those oftentimes very white communities, and I just spent a year in Minneapolis as commissioner of community safety, and Minneapolis is a good example of a community which you have one side of town saying we don't need police. But if you live over north in Minneapolis, if you live in those communities that are challenged by much of the social issues we all are very aware of, they will have a very different story. People of color, Joe, and you're absolutely right, black people more specifically, they want police. But here's the caveat. They want good police.
Right.
They want good police that's going to be constitutional in their actions, going to be legal in what they do, and going to be respectful to the communities. But people want policing, and people deserve good policing. But we are going to have to consider the fact how we can police in the future is going to be very different than in the past. And that's another conversation for another day I hope we have a chance to talk about. But this is a very complex issue, even when it comes to homicides, because we know it's cyclical. It goes up, it comes down, it goes up, it comes down. And sometimes there is a great deal of variables that are, there are a number of variables that are involved as to why that happened from one city to the next.
Right. I mean, so many great points have been made. Thank you so much, Cedric Alexander. I greatly appreciate it. So many great points made, and it's something that the commissioner has said, that Cedric just said. We need more police. We need good police. But something that Cedric said, that I've heard Commissioner Bratton say, that Claire said, Senator McCaskill said, Mika, these police officers, we need more police officers. They need to be rooted in the communities. Yeah. They need to be connected with the communities. They have to build the trust. That's how Commissioner Bratton did it in New York and LA. That's how Claire McCaskill did it in Kansas City. That is the key.
So former New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton, NBC News senior law enforcement analyst Cedric Alexander, thank you both very much, and we will come back to this conversation at 17 past the hour. We still have a lot more to get to this morning. Speaker Kevin McCarthy said yesterday he is directing the House Oversight, Judiciary, and Ways and Means committees to open an inquiry into President Biden centered on his family business dealings. McCarthy called the inquiry a, quote, logical next step as the Republican-led House seeks bank records and other documents from both Biden and his son Hunter. The Speaker's decision to single-handedly launch the inquiry is a stark reversal from his previous comments. Less than 2 weeks ago, he told Breitbart he would not launch an impeachment inquiry without a full vote in the House. McCarthy's announcement yesterday also contrasts with comments he made in 2019 when he criticized then Speaker Nancy Pelosi for launching an impeachment inquiry into then President Trump without a full House vote. Take a look.
Our job is to legislate, not to continue to investigate something in the back when you cannot find any reason to impeach this president. I am directing our House committee to open a formal impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. She cannot change the laws of this Congress. She cannot unilaterally decide We're in an impeachment inquiry. I do not make this decision lightly.
Oh my God! I'm sorry. It's the.
It's parody of
It's
himself.
yeah. The inquiry was eventually authorized by the then Democratic-led.
Talk about Beauty and the Beast. Talk about an oxymoron. Talk about bittersweet. Talk about contradicting stances that one takes towards being one way to satisfy his bias innuendos at one given time, and then his perspective changes to the point that now his whole concept has changed in how that he's going to look at this particular person. Talk about unfairness. Talk about hypocrites. Hypocrisy. Can you really get any worse than that? You know, that's one thing that if you'll notice about God, about the Bible, those that believe in God, is that God says that he is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. God created 10 commandments about 4,000 years ago, something like that, whenever he spoke directly to Moses and put the commandments on the wall, on these pallets, these stone pallets. Since then, God hasn't added to those commandments. God hadn't taken away from those commandments. Those commandments are just as real today as the day that he wrote them over 4,000 years ago. That's the stability in God. Now let's look at the instability in humanity. The Speaker of the House is only one out of probably a trillion different examples in how unstable not just the American laws have become, or the American politicians have become, but all over the world. All over the world. The laws of God has not altered. They haven't changed. They haven't squandered. They haven't added to or taken from. The laws of God are the same today as what they was thousands and thousands of years ago. Now, if you want to look at stability, you're not going to get no more stabler than that. And that's the reason why God is God, and that's the reason why humanity is humanity. But that's something that humanity really needs to look at, pertaining to all the instabilities that's been going on. And of course, if you put that into the account toward what the Bible says, that Satan is the author of confusion, that he's out to kill, steal, and destroy, bingo. Now you can go to the core of origin towards who actually planted this seed in humanity that created this chaos. This chaos that we're in right now. Who helped to create the chaos? Bingo. Now you're starting to get it.
Led House. Claire McCaskill, your reaction to whoever Kevin McCarthy is this morning.
Right.
Well, since we've been talking about crime, I've decided that I would rather spend a month in solitary confinement at Rikers than be Kevin McCarthy for the next month. This guy, here's what happened. When he got the speakership, the Fringe gave him a hand grenade and they said, you have to hold it. You can't get rid of it. You have to hold it, and we get to decide when to pull the pin. And they're fixing to pull the pin. And so he looks weak. He looks desperate. He is not accomplishing anything because without a vote, then this idea that somehow subpoenas are more meaningful is just stupid.
It looks very unstable.
True, they're not more meaningful if there's no authorization by the House of Representatives. So all the White House has to do is say we're going to go by the Trump Office of Legal Counsel in DOJ that said we don't have to honor subpoenas if it has not been authorized by the House of Representatives. So it's a stupid exercise. I can't decide who looked weaker in the last 24 hours, Kevin McCarthy or Putin, but they both look pretty weak.
Well, that and the fact that Kevin McCarthy's been publicly scolded now yesterday on the floor of the House by members of the Freedom Caucus saying, watch out, pal, if you don't do what we say, it's your job. Democrats, as you can imagine, are rallying around President Biden in the wake of that impeachment inquiry announcement, calling the effort a distraction.
I think it's absurd. The American people want us to do things for them. And here you have a group of Republicans, not all, but too many,
Get on out.
who are off the deep end.
Three MAGA Republicans have launched an illegitimate impeachment inquiry that is a kangaroo court, fishing expedition, and conspiracy theater rolled into one.
Kevin McCarthy has lost control of the gavel. MAGA extremists are running the House.
Asking about this news that Speaker McCarthy has formally launched an impeachment or has said he's going to.
Oh my God, really? Oh my gosh. It's devastating. Ooh, don't do it. Please don't do it. Oh no.
Senator Fetterman, their odd reaction.
That reminds me of me talking about the Antichrist and the one world government, the New World Order, the opening of the seals, the four horsemen, the two witnesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Throughout these past 30 years, it was do as I say and not as I do type attitude here in America towards the churches discussing or talking about these things. But nobody was actually willing to pursue those things. And that was one of the things that I feel like that the state of Kentucky up here working with LBL, Land Between the Lakes, in Western Kentucky, working through the federal court systems, was hoping for whenever they ordered for a study to be done. And I wound up in MCC in downtown Chicago being studied by Dr. Dana, that they was hoping that I would get up there and get to talking about the Antichrist and get to talking about the devil and get to talking about all these other things that so many people has put on the spooky list of things that we know about, but we're not supposed to discuss because it's taboo in actuality. And they was hoping that I would basically put a rope or a noose around my own neck and hang myself. And the next thing you know, Dr. Dana and the judge up here in Paducah, Kentucky, would get together. They would collaborate together, and they'd say, "Yeah, we believe that this individual needs to be not just X-rayed or examined, but we think that this person needs to go to Springfield, Missouri, and be institutionalized until he gets to the point that he has a sounder mind, or we think that he's no longer a threat to society." In the meantime, they feed you full of Thorazine or some other kind of strong hypnotic chemical drug that basically chemically is the same thing as doing surgery on somebody, towards basically doing a anatomy on somebody, going in and cutting tendons in their brain, towards turning them into basically a zombie. In other words, if you're not a zombie, if you're not crazy whenever you go into these facilities, you will be after you come out, providing that you do come out, because you'll basically be walking around slobbering all over your shoes, bumping into the wall, not knowing daylight from dark. This is what the people in Land Between the Lakes wanted to do to the individual that's talking to you right now and behind the camera. They wanted to destroy my life. And it's got to the point that the law don't want to harm or hurt the true people that's out here committing crimes, but people like myself, they want to bring destruction into people like my life. So it speaks volumes to me. I don't know about everybody else, but it speaks volumes to me towards what has happened to our law in regards to them becoming wicked. Rather than working for a righteous group of people in a righteous way, now they want to work in a demonic way. And that comes right back to Weakley County and Obion County, towards the interferences that I've had in Kenton, Tennessee, Martin, Tennessee, and Dresden, Tennessee, basically in Nashville, Tennessee, with the state government, not counting towards what went on in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, whenever I went out there to investigate them.
So, Mike Barnacle, a few things to point to.
Where'd you
Again,
go?
this is a lot about Hunter Biden, a lot of smoke, but no fire. That's what they say they're looking for around President Biden. They're talking about activity that took place in 2015, 2016, allegedly, while he was vice president of the United States. And we should point out a lot of this started, the federal investigation to Hunter Biden started in 2018 when Donald Trump was president. So the House Republicans' frustration could be directed back at the Trump administration for those couple of years where they didn't come up with anything on Joe Biden either. What's your analysis of what we've seen and the use now of impeachment as a political tool?
You know, I have no analysis. This is sad. This is just a sad thing. There's a lot of whataboutism going on now about this. You know, what about the Kushners, Jared Kushner and his wife?
Yeah.
And there's all of that. But this is particularly sad, given the fact that it's one of the two major political parties. This is the ostensible leader in the House of one of the two major political parties, Kevin McCarthy, and he is so pathetic. He shows up, he looks like a pathetic individual with a gun in his head. Claire mentioned walking around with a hand grenade, you know, and he can't let go of the hand grenade because then the thing will explode, and he knows it. His whole political career is all wrapped up in this bogus attempt to file impeachment proceedings against the President of the United States. I am old enough to remember when people ran for public office, most people who ran for public office, with the idea of helping people. And now we have one legitimate political party that's no longer really legitimate, the Republican Party, where the bulk of the people in the party seem to be running for office or holding office in order to hurt people, not help people. And I'm not talking just about President Biden. I'm talking about your average citizen. They're more interested in filing impeachment than they are in making sure senior citizens get their Social Security checks on time, that health care benefits are accrued to people in need of health care, things like that, things that people live on each and every day. They're not interested in that.
So the White House reaction is relatively unfazed, and they saw this coming. This has been in the works since the Republicans took control of the House back at the beginning of the year. And to be clear, no White House wants to go through an impeachment inquiry. They're time-consuming, they're draining, they can end up in unexpected directions. But those I talked to in the building yesterday say that senior staff, including the president himself, you know, resigned to it. This is going to happen, but also think it could be a political opportunity in some ways. I think this is the Republicans' overreach, akin to what happened to Bill Clinton in the 1990s. Even Donald Trump saw his numbers go up a little bit, the first impeachment in 2019. They've got a team of lawyers and communications staffers and legislative affairs aides, Joe and Mika. They are ready for this. They do think, and they've been reading the situation, this is McCarthy casting about for some sort of purpose, desperately trying to stay in power, trying to appease Trump, trying to appease those on the right. And they think it could really backfire among those suburban independent voters, those swing voters come times next year, both the presidential and the congressional races.
Well, I mean, we've seen it time and again. I'm not exactly sure why in many cases, but impeachment usually helps the president being impeached politically. You can look at Bill Clinton also. Helped Donald Trump, but the first impeachment helped his numbers go up. It just does.
I think the dynamics of this one especially so. Yeah. Let's bring in columnist, the associate editor for the Washington Post, David Ignatius.
Well, David, you have official Washington talking, certainly the White House talking, your latest opinion piece in the Washington Post also has my wife talking, David, and I don't know that you'd like to hear what she has to say, but you may. Go ahead.
The piece is entitled, President Biden Should Not Run Again in 2024. And in it you write, quote, Biden wrote his political testament in his inaugural address. When our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. Mr. President, maybe this is that moment when duty has been served. Biden would carry two big liabilities into a 2024 campaign. He would be 82 when he began a second term. And according to a recent Associated Press and ORC poll, 77% of the public think he is too old to be effective for 4 more years. Because of their concerns about Biden's age, voters would sensibly focus on his presumptive running mate, Kamala Harris. She is less popular than Biden with a 39.5% approval rating. According to polling website 538, Harris has many laudable qualities, but the simple fact is that she has failed to gain traction in the country or even within her own party. I hope Biden has this conversation with himself about whether to run and that he levels with the country about it. It would focus the 2024 campaign. Who is the best person to stop Trump? That was the question when Biden decided to run in 2019, and it's still the essential test of a Democratic nominee today. So, David, what are you really saying here? Because if you look at Biden's track record and the fact that he has beaten Trump, I don't know why you would question his ability to beat him again. There are other presidents who are later in years, including the Republican presumptive nominee. Is this really about Kamala Harris?
So, Mika, you summarized my argument, what led me to write this piece, just right. I admire many things that President Biden has done in domestic and foreign policy. I do think that legacy, and at the center of his legacy, is the fact that he stopped Trump. He stopped him in 2020. He stopped Trump supporters in the midterm elections. He's mobilized the Justice Department that is now bringing Trump to accountability. I worry that all those achievements are at risk. And it seemed to me through this summer, I haven't gone anywhere in the country. I haven't talked to any group of people where this issue of whether President Biden should run again hasn't been a centerpiece of conversation. It doesn't get into the newspapers. It doesn't get much on TV except Fox News, which is obsessed with it. And I thought that it was time to raise that question. And that, again, the heart of it is whether Joe Biden is the best person to carry this legacy forward. He may decide that he's the only person who could defeat Donald Trump. I mean, he sees that as his mission. It's why he ran in the first place back in 2019. He may decide he's the guy who can do it and nobody else can, and that's his decision. But I felt it was time to have a more public discussion about this. It is, as I say, something I'd be surprised if you and Joe and the people you talk with are not discussing it in private. I find that everywhere I go, it's a subject. And what journalists like me should do is take issues like that people are talking about in private and bring them forward so we can have a better discussion. So that's a simple explanation.
I want to tap into your expertise, though, because you write a column that is, extremely, I think, in a way, it's a very, very strong message for you, David Ignatius, to write this column. And you have spent much of your career spending time writing about or writing with the greatest strategic thinkers of our time on world affairs, on foreign policy. And when you look at what Joe Biden has done with NATO and the war in Ukraine, and in terms of galvanizing, putting this country back on a track to lead on the world stage, who would be an alternative right now who could do that on day one, a legitimate one?
So, Mika, I can't name you that person. The thing about the democratic process is that it yields answers to questions like that through this amazing phenomenon I still believe in. I believe that open discussion, that nominating campaigns produce clarity, produce candidates, produce leaders. I couldn't agree more that Biden has been a strong leader in foreign policy and in domestic policy, as I wrote in the column. He has passed some of the most significant domestic social legislation in decades. In foreign policy, one of the things that I admire most about Biden is that he's gathered a team around him of very solid people who think strategically. He is the leader of that team, but the team members themselves are strong. I have no doubt that this team of sensible, strategic people in the Democratic Party who are driving foreign policy forward in a good way will continue, no matter who the Democrats choose. So on that score, I'm less concerned than you are. I think it comes down to what we were talking about earlier. Is Joe Biden the person who can stop Donald Trump or somebody like Trump who gets the Republican nomination? That's what he's got. He's got to look in the mirror, search his soul, and make that decision. And I wanted to raise that question. I'd like him to think that through carefully, because I have my concerns.
Well, and Willie, just to answer David's question, Mika and I, everybody we talk to, every political discussion, it talks a lot about Trump, but when it comes to Joe Biden, people say, man, he's too old to run, isn't he? I mean, he's not really going to run. When I say every discussion, I don't mean 99% of the discussions. Every discussion. We got it. I asked Reverend Al, and he was hearing it all the time on our show this past week. He's hearing it as well. So, we often will complain about Republicans who will say one thing about Donald Trump off the air and another on air. Well, let me just say, Democrats off the air will say Joe Biden's too old. Why is he running? On the air, they won't say that. So I commend David for at least raising the question. I mean, my question, of course, Willie, is who can do a better job as president as Joe Biden? Who?
The Democrats don't want to raise their hands up and say in defeat that they have failed, because by them telling the world that their leader is no longer worthy to be in a position that he or she is in this case it's a he, would be like owning up to a crime. And because they are playing this game towards denial, they'll say one thing in behind the doors, but in front of the camera, they'll say something completely different. Once more, it goes back to that hypocrisy. They're doing the exact same thing to Donald Trump. They'll tell you in behind the doors, with the cameras not running, Donald Trump's a sleazebag. Donald Trump's a this. Donald Trump's a that. Donald Trump done this. Donald Trump done that. But because they don't have nothing else to stand on or to stand with, when they get in front of the camera, they say something completely different. That's the hypocrisy coming from both sides, from both parties. And because of it, neither party, in my view, is worthy of a good, sound vote, including my own. And if the truth be known, if you look at both parties in how that one party has whirled the accountability issue over to the other party, and the other party whirls it back over to the other party, they are both guilty of putting us where we are today, towards the loss of jobs, all the drugs, all the illegals coming over here, $32 trillion, all the jails being full. And the main people that I put the blame off on, and you can criticize me for this if you want, I'm sure that you will, is the church people that allowed for it to happen. Regardless whether it was the church people that was the Republicans or the church people that was the Democrats. It was the church people that was supposed to be running a clean show, a legitimate show, a truthful show, a honest show. And it was them that started crawfishing, compromising, backing up, to the point that now we have been led off into a direction, just like Jesus talked about salt, and salt being potent. You know, salt is basically the cure for a lot of, most everything. That Jesus used the example that if salt has lost its potency, what good is it other than to be trampled down by the foot of man? Well, that's going back to the churches. If the churches can no longer function in a honest, sincere, true way, and whenever I say true, I'm talking about the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Whenever they can no longer function as a society pertaining to the citizens of this great country, then is whenever you have the blind leading the blind, then is whenever you have the salt no longer having its potency to the point that it's no longer functionable or no longer good other than to be trampled down by the foot of man. That was the teachings of Jesus Christ. These are not the teachings of Juby. Juby is not, I repeat, Juby is not a Juby Christ. Juby is not a Juby Savior. Juby is only a voice piece for God in the brotherhood of Christ. Not the Antichrist, but Christ, pertaining to a righteous, holy, true, eternal God. And whenever we deviate from that, regardless whether it be from one side or the other, and we continue to deviate from that, and we continue to compromise, guess what happens to our politics? The same reflection upon the politics of today in the 21st century, in the year 2023, fixing to go off into the election instability part of 2024. The same reflection upon the politics is the same reflection upon to the corporate churches here in America. And whenever I say that, I'm not painting it with a broad brush per se, that every church and every member of the church is full of hypocrisy or corrupt. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that by and large, whenever you get to looking at the fundamental values of where we're supposed to be today versus where we was, let's say 35, 40, 50 years ago, versus where we are today, we have deviated from that. And our laws, our political laws reflect that. Whenever you let a baby raper go, or somebody that's been selling all kinds of drugs, and you have some sort of penny ante judge because he got paid off to be able to let that person go, regardless of who that person may be, if they have committed the crime, then that person needs to suffer for the crime that they have committed. But then again, you'll go along, or a lot of people will, towards people such as myself that does be proactive, that is out there voicing my opinion. You want to slam me and condemn me and criticize me and scrutinize every word that I got to say because I am truthful, I am honest, I am bold, and I am standing up for the body and not just one particular person. That's what's happened with the Republican Democrat Party. They are no longer standing up for the majority, in a sense, towards the party as far as us, we the people. They are only standing up for the things that they want to stand up for, that they feel like that they should pursue. And the heck with the rest of everybody else. We're just going to do what we want to do because we want to become in power. We're in this thing as a championship towards two boxers in a ring, and we're going to win regardless of how we have to win. Well, that ain't what our politics is supposed to be around. Our politics is not supposed to be around winning. Our politics is supposed to be around what is best for the American people during the time that we're dealing with the problems that we're dealing with today. Because we're not dealing with the same problems today as what they was dealing with back 30 years ago or 40 years ago during Nixon or Carter era. Our whole circumstances has changed. The dynamics has changed. Everything about our laws has changed. They didn't have internet back then. They didn't have social media platforms back then. Now we do. And if we don't put it into the equation towards how we're going to respond and react to these things, just like everybody and their brother having a phone now. Who controls those phones? Who controls the media on those phones? I realize that the police and the policing needed to go through an alteration. They needed to be reformed. My testimony speaks volumes of that pertaining to what has went on in my life, beginning at the top, going down to the bottom, the top indicating the White House. If the things did not occur in my life that occurred in the late 1980s pertaining to Ronald Reagan's administration, I truly believe that we would not be where we are today if things would have been handled differently. Now, people can argue with that all they want, but the bottom line is this: our government tried to cheat its way into victory. Our government was speaking out of both sides of its mouth in talking about peace, but at the same time going to war, pretending to Desert Storm and Desert Shield that led to 9/11, that led to the Afghanistan war. And I couldn't tell you how many trillions and trillions of dollars that have been spent and how many millions of lives have been affected on account of that. That's the part that the people in Kenton, Tennessee, that was a part of this decision that happened in my life going back 40 years ago, don't understand or don't want to understand. Or they act like it, they don't understand it. That's the part that the people up here in Martin and Dresden, Tennessee, and Weakley County, Tennessee, don't understand. Or they act like it, they don't want to understand it. Because if those events did not occur, kind of like a snowballing event, if they would have done the proper things in the church community right here in Northwest Tennessee, do you really think that I would have went through what I had to go through, not only in Kentucky, not only in Atlanta, Georgia, but also in downtown Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, whenever they deliberately planted a bomb in the back of my truck and was going to try to promote me as me being a monster? And the only reason why that they done that was because I become too close to the truth in investigating them, understanding that there was a hidden secret, that there was a government cover-up towards them not expressing the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help them God, to not only their people, but the rest of the world. Just like whenever all that stuff happened down at Waco, did the American people know that ATF had set up shop down there for about 8 months? 8 months that was purposely targeting them people, that was entrapping them people by selling them the very guns and then using some sort of a tax law to get a warrant to go down there and do what they done to those poor people? Did the people really know the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth pertaining to the Waco Mount Carmel incident? No, they did not. We was lied to. We was manipulated to. That's what you call a government cover-up. Because if the people would have known what had been going on down there, verbatim, of everything, of how it went, how it worked out, and why it done what it done, they would have had a completely different opinion about the Waco incident. And there's no doubt, I'm not trying to whitewash nothing. What David Koresh was doing down there with those children was illegitimate. It was illegitimate. It was wrong. But at the same time, wasn't it just as wrong, if not wronger, from the professional perspective of what the law went down there and done towards barbecuing all them people? That was a bigger crime than what David Koresh ever thought about doing with 16 and 15 and 14-year-old girls that basically was getting permission from the parents to do. They was a messed up group of people down there in Mount Carmel. And the United States federal government, or a branch of it, took advantage of them people and panhandled on them people by entrapping them people, by selling them guns and not paying taxes, and then turning around and getting a federal judge to sign off on a no-knock warrant from daylight to dark. And then if you combine that with other mistakes that they done, they know that they had been, that their plans have been tainted. They should have stopped. They should have reevaluated. They didn't. They went ahead and pursued that bust that turned into a all out and out brawl, a war basically, where some agents died and 2 or 3 other of the Davidians died, and David Koresh himself received a very horrible wound that I'm surprised he didn't die from. A gut wound is a very, very bad wound. And that's what he received. He received a gut wound. But one thing led to another thing, led to another thing. And why? Because of the illegitimacies coming from the professional people. These are the people that we pay to protect us, to take care of us. These are the people that have allowed for the internet now to come into our lives. I just heard the other day where some other agency got hacked. I don't know where it was at, but this stuff is going on worldwide. We only hear on the news probably about a tenth, probably not even a tenth of what's actually occurring worldwide. And if the truth be known, we probably don't hear, or it don't really get focused upon national news, but about 40% of the time of us knowing actually what's going on in our own state, in our own country. Think about that for a second. You think that you're on top of the news, right? You think that you're on top of the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. You're finding out by listening to programs like this coming from the Windmill Ministries missions that instead of you knowing the truth, my friends, you actually know a very, very, very small percentage of the truth. This is what people like Al Gore and other people such as myself have been trying to put in the right perspective towards showing people the truth. And instead of the people appreciating the truth, or instead of people honoring those that are telling the truth, they actually have been punishing those people. Al Gore was punished. The people in the state of Tennessee punished Al Gore to the point that they was willing to sacrifice their own party because of. Their own Democrat Party did not hold up their own man that could have been substantial for the state of Tennessee in every perspective. Not just on a state perspective coming from Nashville, Tennessee, but from every perspective in every county. It could have had a profound effect in a positive way and not a negative way. But they still did not hold that man up. Why did they not hold that man up?
Politics, whether you're with
Why
Democrats
did they not
or
hold that
Republicans,
man up? Because they did not want the truth. Why did they not hold up the man that's talking in behind the camera right now pertaining to Dennis Jackson, known as Juby, that helped to form and found the Windmill Ministries going all the way back into 1989, being spread out to the general public? Because they did not want the truth. The whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help us God. That's the part that we have deviated from. And when you deviate from the truth, now you're working in illegitimacies. And it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you're working in illegitimacies, if your life is bogus, if you can't be truthful to yourself, can you really be truthful to the one that you're serving under? That's just like what Jesus said, or no, it wasn't Jesus, I think it was Paul, that said that if you can't love your brother or sister in Christ who you can see, even though you may not agree with them, or you don't go along with maybe their perfume or their makeup that they put on, or maybe you don't go along with their tie, or they drive a different vehicle than you drive, or they go to a different church than what you go to, Paul said that if you can't love the person that you can see that is in the same category as you towards being in the family of Christ, how can you authentically love God if you can't love your brother or your sister in the Lord? That's where the church world, that's where the political world, that's where us as Americans have faltered and failed. And because of it, now you're seeing all the consequences that goes along with it. And yes, it began back with the baby boomers and the Woodstock era people that has led us down this endless road of where we are today. Now, can we do anything about that? No, that's hindsight. That's already spilt milk. We can't do nothing about that. But what we can do is alter our future. What we can do is change our behavior towards where we go from this point on, because now the truth has been brought out to you, and what you do with that truth is going to be up to you. Now, you can continue to keep kicking the can down the road the same way that our politicians do, pertaining to threatening to shut down the government and raising the debt ceiling every 6 months or every year. You can continue to do like they do, or you can stop this foolishness and decide, you know what, maybe it is time that we smelt the roses, or smelt some of the stuff that we've been scooping out to people that we've been walking off into now for the past 25 or 30 years. Maybe it is time for us to come clean. Maybe it is time for us to start looking at the whole truth rather than just parts of it. Kind of like the Bible. You got people that want to cherry pick the Bible. They want to cherry pick the King James Version Bible, and if that Bible don't suit them, then they go to some other Bible. They go to another Bible that has different illustrations or different interpretations of the same verses. They have picked and rattled and scrambled, and they have deciphered and redesigned the Bible in so many different ways that even some theologians out there cannot make heads or tails out of so many different Bibles out there, of so many different interpretations of the same verse. There's only one Jesus. There's only one Jesus that died for all of man's sins. There's only one man that raised the dead, turned water into wine, walked on water. There's only one man that rose from the grave, that now sits upon the right hand of the Father, making intercession for us. And you can try to elaborate that. You can try to complicate that. You can try to make it as confusing as you want, but as far as I am concerned, it's just as easy as rolling off of a log. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, sounds like a duck, smells like a duck, odds are it's a duck. And the proof is in the pudding, in the direction that the American people, much less the Christian American people, has decided to take here in America, that has led us down this endless road of doom. And if we continue on the road, the trajectory that we're on, it's even going to lead into a deeper, darker, more sinister time of doom. And I tend to wonder if that's not what people want. I tend to wonder if this isn't being done intentionally. I mean, whenever you talk about the laws, and they want to base the laws off of intent, off of somebody's, what actually motivated them. What was your motives in behind you doing what you done? It's going to be based upon the penalty that you receive from the law. Well, whenever you see this again and again and again, year after year after year, regardless whether Republican or Democrat, and you continue to keep making the same mistakes again and again and again, there becomes a time to where you can no longer shield yourself under the umbrella of ignorance, or under the umbrella of insanity, or under the umbrella of pleading the fifth. That's what so many squandering Christian Americans have done, and because of it, it has put us where we are today. Now, if people don't agree with that, if they can't see that, if they can't comprehend that, well, that's up to them. You know, there's some people that you could preach to them until you was black and blue in the face, and I promise you, those are not the people that Jesus told us to continue to talk to and to preach at. You know why? Because Jesus said, once you've made a determination that you're basically throwing your pearls before the swine, he said, quit throwing your pearls before the swine. He also said that once you have reached a determination factor in your life, that basically you're throwing good effort to bad, he said to walk away from them people. Don't debate them. Don't argue with them. Don't beg them. Don't plead with them. Don't try to blackmail them. Just walk away from them and let their own fate come into their own lives, because they was the ones that obviously made their bed hard, and now they're going to sleep in it. The only problem with that is that it's not only the guilty that's sleeping in this bed of nails that they've created for themselves, but now it's also the lives of the innocent. And if we can't motivate the innocent, if we can't motivate the young towards standing up and doing the right things pertaining to our political parties, then guess what? They're just as guilty as the elderly. They're just as guilty as the baby boomers. They're just as guilty as the Grateful Dead, the Woodstock era people. That was the ones that started the snowball, that the snowball has now become the size that it is today. So there has to be some sort of stopping. That's kind of like child abuse. And I forgot, that was probably 4 or 5 years ago. I was talking to some female over in Union City Courthouse, and she was one of the people that engaged in child abuse behavior that happens in Obion County. And we got to talking a little bit, and I got to talking to her about the abusive behavior that I went through here in this area. And she said, well, that's understandable. She said, it's never been cut off. It's never been addressed properly pertaining to, yes, you can spank your child. Yes, you can discipline your children. Yes, you can be abrupt by talking to them a little loud or showing, emotions and how you feel. But then again, you're not supposed to be able to pick up a damn club and beat the hell out of them or take a damn extension cord like I've seen my brothers get beat with, take a round black extension cord and whip them to the point that you had to in-house them for a week to make sure that nobody seen the lacerations on their faces and on their arms and on their back. That way nobody would turn you in and you wouldn't have to worry about a truant officer coming to your home. It's hard to break old habits. It's hard to break old ideologies. And that's where we are here in America pertaining to all these different issues, not just the computer issue, not just other types of issues. This guy here I like. I'm going to back it up here because I really like his insight. But all the above. Once more, where does the core of origin begin? It begins at the church level. And whenever the church level can no longer be sound, can no longer be stable according to the standards of the church, then you can basically throw the rest of it out the door to begin with. It's kind of like throwing the baby out with the water out with the baby. You got a problem. You're obviously not attacking the problem in the right area, and rather than dealing with the problem with the baby, you just throw the bathwater out with the baby. Well, that's really a way to solving the problem, isn't it? In other words, get rid of the bathwater. While you're getting rid of the bathwater, go ahead and get rid of the baby too. That's a way of solving the problem, isn't it? No, it's not. But that's what certain individuals here in America, especially in the church world, that has become so compromisable whenever it comes to sin, and whenever it comes to cherry picking the Bible, and whenever it comes to believing only the things that they want to believe, and not the whole Bible and just parts of the Bible. That's not why the Bible was engineered and created to begin with, going all the way back, I guess, into the 12th century. Is that right? King James? 14th century, something like that? Long about the Knight Riders era? Not the Knight Riders era, but long about the Crusade era, whenever they was crusading and carrying on the way that they was carrying on towards trying to spread Christianity throughout various continents, in which some of that I've looked at, and it was just about as heinous and as barbaric as you can think of. But then again, that was one of the main reasons why Martin Luther decided to break away from the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church was becoming too much in the left field. So you may be asking, where's the neutral territory here? Well, it's not in the middle. You know why I say it's not in the middle? It's because God himself expresses that many, many times in the Bible. Not Paul, not Peter, not John, not some of the other prophets of God, but Jesus himself said in the words of Red, that God would rather you either be hot or cold. If you was lukewarm, he'd spew thee out of thy mouth. Once you become a lukewarm state of people, then you become that salt. that Jesus talked about that wasn't no good other than to be trampled down by the foot of man. That's where we are as a society, here not only in America, but throughout the world. And until we do an abrupt face in turning from that and understanding that, we will never get our political problems resolved, because of the spirituality problems have never been resolved. You've never gotten the church world problems resolved. Until you work on the church world problems, you're not never going to get the political problems resolved. You're going to continue to be just like a dog chasing after its tail. You're going to be moving around and around in circles. You're going to be moving, but you're not going to be going nowhere. I continue to keep telling people this again and again and again. I don't get no response. I don't get no positive response. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have no supporters regarding the windmill ministries. The courts here in the state of Tennessee is still very judgmental about me. The federal courts are still very judgmental against me, because I've never got any type of an apology from Homeland Security pertaining to Secret Service. I've never got any type of response from any of the federal courts up in Paducah, Kentucky, and I've never got any type of response other than a negative response coming from Oklahoma, especially whenever I went and done what they told me to do, which was go get 3 estimates pertaining to what it would cost to either repair or replace your camper, and I submitted that to City Hall in downtown Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and was denied and was rejected. As far as I'm concerned, every time I put out a video like this, I'm illustrating not just my disapprovals. In other words, I'm not just making complaints, but I'm also trying to look at solutions, just like shutting off the ability of a car being able to perform. Just like I've talked about the gun violence pertaining to if you have to be qualified to be a mechanic, or qualified to be an electrician, or qualified to be able to operate an 18-wheeler, or you're an airplane pilot, if you have to be qualified in these areas, how come our laws does not surround being qualified to handle an Army assault rifle, an AK-47 or an AR? How come our laws is not structured around that pertaining to the gun issues as far as qualifications? Then you can look at other matters that I'm talking about pertaining to fires. How come they do not have sprinkler systems on these houses way out in these woods somewhere in regards towards, in case there was a massive fire pertaining to a forest fire, that at least maybe the insurance companies wouldn't be out so much money in having to replace all these homes? How come the people in Boulder, Colorado, that it was the law that they could not have metal roofs, even though it was the roofs that was basically part of the main problem, as the embers was flowing through the air at 60 miles an hour, that would land on the roof, that would catch the roof on fire, that would burn the house down or the business down? How come these building codes hadn't been changed according to the standards of what we're dealing with pertaining to the fires, the same way that they've been changed in your coastal line areas pertaining to hurricanes? How come that other building codes, like in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, to where you cannot even build a new home today without it having a storm cellar, a safe house, somewhere either on the property or somewhere in the house or around the house? How come we let this go on? The blind leading the blind. And if the blind lead both the blind, then guess what happens according to Jesus's philosophies on the blind? Using that as an example, they both wind up in the ditch. But yet no, they want to persecute people like me. You know, I talk about gas or sliming people that are breaking the lawbreakers whenever a whole group of people come into a store that basically robs $500,000 or $1 million. Who do you think pays for that? You think it's the store owner? He pays for part of it, but that insurance company pays for that other part. Now, how come we ain't been smart enough? I mean, if we was smart enough to put dye on money that after somebody stole it, ink bomb blowed up and put dye all over the money to the point that you couldn't the money would basically become worthless. How come somebody hadn't been smart enough to create some sort of a gas or a slime to slime these people? That way, once they was out on the streets running with the merchandise, at least maybe somebody would see, hey, this person's got ink all over them. They've been slimed. They're obviously an outlaw. How come we ain't been smart enough to figure out ways of being able to shut the electrical grid down on a homeowner that was basically going from a homeowner to being a homesteader? Somebody that wanted something for free. Or maybe do something else to that home where it puts out this crazy noise. Or maybe this crazy smell of some sort. We're going to have to work smarter rather than working harder. And that's the reason why I say that neither party is qualified to deal with the problems of today. They asked Joe Biden just the other day while he was in Alaska, coming back from some sort of a summit in regards towards connecting with another country. I think it was India maybe, or Africa, or wherever. But they asked him if he felt like that the country was safer. And you know what his response was? Yeah, I think the country's safer. Really? You think the country's safer, Mr. Biden? As a chief and commander, especially after what we've just got through going through pertaining to COVID, especially after seeing all these uprisings in all these other countries, especially seeing what Russia is doing to the Ukrainians, especially seeing what now North Korea is boastfully boasting about some sort of a nuclear bomb that can make it all the way here to America. Especially seeing what's going on in the Middle East pertaining to Iran and Iraq, especially seeing what's going on pertaining to all the weather, the forces of nature, where an event just happened over in Libya that killed, they're saying now that's probably killed at least 12 to 15,000 people. That's almost unbelievable amount of people to think that could die from something like that. But then again, the earthquake that just hit over in Turkey, going over towards Syria, they claim it killed about 45,000 people. 45,000 people dead. That ain't counting the people that's injured and hurt, and now their lives is turned totally upside down to the point that death actually becomes appealing to them rather than life. And if the world continues to get bombarded, get ravaged by this demonic force that's coming out from above, because the Bible says that Satan will come down. If you're coming down, it means you have to come up from somewhere. Come down in great wrath, because he knoweth his time is short. If we're not smart enough to identify what we're going through, do you really think that we're going to be smart enough to work our way out of what we're going through if we're not smart enough to figure out what we're going through? Think about that for a second. You have to first identify the problem. And then after you've identified the problem, then maybe you can identify a solution to the problem. But yet no, they still want to put me out on the limb. I'm still hanging out to dry. The Windmill Ministries, the founder, still does not have supporters, still does not have backers, still has not gotten any type of formal or informal. Well, I did get an informal apology from Tommy Moore, the judge up here in Dresden, about certain things, but I don't think it was sincere, and it was over the phone, and I think he was just talking out of his head to be able to say things that sounded good. When it comes to the sincerity of Tommy Moore, I put just about as much faith as him doing that as I would a dog being able to pull an automobile down the road. It'd have to be an awful strong dog or an awful small automobile for that to ever be accomplished. So that tells you how much faith that I have in Judge Tommy Moore pertaining to his sincerity, pertaining to what went on out here for 3 consecutive years that costed me the death of my only remaining living sibling, which was my younger brother. It's awful. We've reached a point of grueling, intestine, grotesque awfulness here in America that we have never had to experience or go through before. And if we don't have smart enough people to figure out the problem, much less the solution to it, we're never going to go nowhere other than deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole. We're going to be just like the dog returning back to its vomit again and again and again. When is the American people going to awaken out of this stupor in the degree of understanding what has occurred has not just occurred with one party, but has occurred with both parties? But let's dig a little deeper. Where does the initial core actually begin? It begins at the church house, not the White House, because it was the church house that dominated the forces of what went on during the Civil War that basically motivated both parties in going where they went. And man, did they ever go down a bloody freaking road. And if that's the area that we want to go down, well, hey, you continue on this same trajectory that you're on right now, and you're going to see some of the most gruesome, harsh things happen right here in the United States that you've never ever. The trajectory that we're going through right now, will make the uprising during the 60s and the 70s. It will make it look like child's play. The civil rights riots and all that other stuff that went on here in America, if we continue on the trajectory that we're on, eventually this will come to a head. And when it does, it will make the civil rights movement look like kindergarten play in comparison to where we are heading as an American citizens. If we don't come together in understanding what is happening, what we're up against, what is going on, instead of us uniting towards defeating the enemy will defeat us. And will be defeated from within the same way as other countries, including Rome, was defeated. And if that's what you want, then you continue to stay on the trajectory that you're on, and there is where we're heading. And I tend to wonder if certain people, politicians, preachers, those that claim to be Christians, just mean-hearted, spirited people, I tend to wonder if that's not where they want this thing to go. They want it to go to a full-blown uproar. And the uproar, because we're so now socially, digitally connected with one another, it'll be just like a cancer spreading all over the world. And whenever that happens, that will be the end of the world. That will be the end of the world, because that will be whenever God himself says enough. And that's whenever the Father will say to Gable, blow the trumpet. The dead in Christ will rise. That's whenever God will come back in flaming fire, taking vengeance upon them that know not God, and upon them who obey not the gospel. And he'll start on one side of the planet, according to the Bible, and he'll gather together his elect from the four corners of the earth, and he'll surround the whole planet in resurrecting the dead and resurrecting those that are worthy of the resurrection. And the rest of us will be thrown off into great, great tribulation. Now, I realize that there's been certain cultures and certain societies at certain times that thought that they was going through great tribulation. And trust me, if you just got through losing your home because of a flood, or you just got through being ravaged because of a wildfire, or you just got through having a pandemic that just got through killing your closest spouse or your breadwinner in your family, you're going through a form of tribulation. But it is not the great tribulation. There's been wars. I mean, I'm sure the people right now going through Ukraine, the people in Ukraine right now that have been brutalized, mangled, their lives have been totally turned upside down. You can't tell me that they're not thinking to themselves, we're going through a form of tribulation. And in reality, they are. They really are. But it is not the great tribulation that it talks about in the Bible. The great tribulation in the Bible has never occurred yet. But trust me, whenever it does, you and me and everybody else will know the difference. Because whenever God comes back in flaming fire and he catches a fire, everything that is burnable upon this planet, other than the trees and other than the ground, spare not the tree, spare the trees and spare the oil, is what the Bible says. See thou hurt not the oil nor the wine, is what the Bible says. Whenever this occurs, it's not just going to be people's houses burned. It's going to be cars. It's going to be airplanes. It's going to be satellites. It's going to be the whole kabang. That's going to fall at once. That's what you're facing on. That's the trajectory target that you're heading towards. And that's the trajectory target that I feel like certain individuals wants to take us down. And I don't say that lightly. I say that very, very remorsefully, because it will be a time of horror. The Bible says that it will be a time of trouble, such as the world has never, ever seen before. And it also expresses it this way. It says that it will be a time of trouble that will never, ever occur again on that level. Now you think in your mind, well, that was horrible. That what happened pertaining to the Great Flood that basically killed out society. And it was. It was horrifying. But you know what? In the horror of that horror, then people died. There was very few people that lived through that. The horror that I'm talking about that's going to happen with the great fire. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Whenever God comes back in flaming fire and does this, those people aren't going to die immediate deaths. They're going to be left here to suffer. We're talking about a complete, total breakdown, a lawlessness of society. We're talking about cannibalism. We're talking about barbarianism. We're talking about some of the most heinous acts of crime that will be committed upon the society during that time, such as most people cannot even begin to fathom. That's what we're knocking on the door of right now. We're knocking on the door of that occurring. Or we're knocking on the door and going in the right direction towards seeing a divine spiritual awakening, a revival that will elevate into a revolution, to re-revolutionize the world. Now, if the world don't want that, that's fine. That's fine. But just keep in mind what the consequences is going to be by not wanting that revival. Because I promise you, whenever this occurs, there will not be no ifs, ands, buts about it that you, my friends, have missed the boat. If you're left here during that time of all that chaos, there will not be no confusing thought about your position that now you have been left here to defend for yourself. Because the only thing that is keeping this thing together right now is the Holy Eternal Father, the Holy Spirit, and a few people that is left here that is trying to help society trying to lead people out of the darkness, that once they're gone, and once the Holy Spirit is gone, you talk about the rise of the false prophet, you talk about the rise of the Antichrist, that will be the opening door pathway to those occurrences happening. That will be whenever your New World Order, the 666 mark of the beast, will come into play, and that will be whenever people will become cold-blooded barbarians. Now, we can laugh, we can giggle, we can snigger. We can put aside these feelings that we have right now, and we can cherry pick the Bible, and we can act as if, oh, that's a thought, isn't it? No, it is not a thought. It is a promise. Whenever God destroyed the old world, he made a promise. In the proceedings of the promise, he created a rainbow. And in the format of the rainbow was a promise. Some people say that the bow in Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 and 2 is pertaining to a promise, a rainbow. It don't say rainbow, it just says he had a bow. It could be interpreted as a promise rather than a literal bow. There was a literal bow in my life pertaining to a crossbow that was put in the category of being an heirloom that my father, out of whatever reason, decided to trade it for a guitar. That could have cared less about the rest of the family members of how they felt about my older brother that got killed in 1976. And if you don't believe me, we thought enough of him to put that bow on his tombstone. You don't put heirlooms on tombstones and then turn around and sell them or get rid of them. Not ordinarily. But that's what my dad done. That was all part of the proceedings of putting me where I am today, towards studying, identifying, looking at the facts. There was Danny, my oldest brother, Douglas, Dennis, me, and then David, my younger brother, the 4 Ds, the Doomsday Devil's Duel. These was all areas that God chose for me to understand in where we are today. And let's say it was a rainbow. Let's say it was a promise, for he had a promise. He was given a crown, and he had a promise, he had a bow, and he went forth conquering and to conquer, according to chapter 6, verses 1 and 2 in Revelations. What is that promise? That promise is an oxymoron. That promise is just as far to the right towards seeing peace and utopia and a manifestation of God's holy, eternal, divine will be done towards turning this around. But it's also a promise pertaining to an oxymoron in the opposite direction towards seeing destruction, misery, horror, pain, and agony. That's where we're at right now. We are in the crossroads. And society, especially the Christian society, can quit playing games, or we can continue on this trajectory road that we're on right now, because I promise you the promises in the Bible will fulfill themselves. And that really don't have nothing to do with my promise. My promise is really minute compared to God's promise. My promise is really just a regular, ordinary promise coming from an ordinary person. Once more, Juby is not a Juby Christ. Juby is not a Juby Savior. Juby is only a subservient unto God towards being a messenger. You have laughed. You have squandered. You have made fun of. You have ridiculed. You have demonized and dehumanized me for the past 30 plus years. I'm really surprised that I have lasted as long as I have towards still trying to help society, towards getting still the negativity, towards not getting responses from the local churches, much less the corporate churches here in America or worldwide. I'm really surprised that I'm still beating this horse. I'm the one that's beating it on the right end. It's the rest of society that's beating the horse on the wrong end. And until we awaken to that, our politics in America is going to continue to be laughed at and mocked and made fun of by various oligarch leaders, regardless whether it be in Russia, China, North Korea, Iraq, Iran, or wherever. In the meantime, we're going to continue to suffer like we've never, ever suffered before, because we are being ravaged by Satan and the satanic forces again and again and again. And these ravages that's coming down in these forces are just as Jesus talked about that would happen in the last days, just as a woman travailing towards her pains becoming more severe, more sharper, and the pains are now coming together even closer. That eventually there'll be a climax. And in the process of this climax will be the determining factor where God looks at Gable and says, blow the trumpet, or God is lenient towards giving humanity a chance of straightening up this mess that others have created for ourselves. And if we're not smart enough to identify that, then we're sure not going to be smart enough to identify fixing the problem. And I know my words may sound callous, they may sound cold, they may sound indifferent, they may sound abrupt, but the words that I'm speaking to you, my friends, are words of truth. And I just pray to God that you can interpret this message coming from the messenger in the proper form. For your own goods, do not weep for me, Jesus said, but weep for your children and your children's children. My message is the same. Do not pity me. Do not cry for me. Do not feel sorry for me, but feel sorry for yourselves. Feel sorry for your children. This bed of indignation that you've created for yourselves. Feel sorry for your grandchildren that you've created for yourselves. This didn't start overnight. And it wasn't created just by one person. And the only way that we're going to render the problem is that we're all going to have to pull together. Because as I made statements, I think it was in the last message that I put out, if the only thing that can unite the American people is a catastrophe, regardless whether it's a catastrophe of a tornado, a catastrophe of a drought, the catastrophe of COVID, the catastrophe of a major fire, the catastrophe of a hurricane, if those are the only things that can unite the people here upon to the planet is catastrophes, my friends, we are in a bad, bad way.
So let's take the long view of this, of impeachment and everything else, and what Republicans are doing here.
We're at a point where it's politics is programming. That's what this is. They needed a new season of something, so they dropped it. And the hope, I think, is that there's so much confusion. It's what about this, what about that, that it clouds everyone's sense, their capacity. They're hoping that it clouds voters' capacity to make judgments and assign the correct weight to different issues. And I go back to this question, are we up to this? Are we up to self-government in an era in which the leadership class of one of the two major parties has decided to be wholly captive to, at best, a 35% group in the country? And the delta here is 34, and for what it's worth, speaking of McCarthy, 34% is the number of folks
who still approved of Joe McCarthy after he was censured in 1954 or 55. What's so interesting about this moment is that there's another 14 or 15% of the country that, for various reasons, go along with this Trumpist base. And if enough of those folks, this one you're talking about, if enough of those people can say, you know what, actually the country and the Constitution is more important than winning the afternoon, then perhaps we're okay. But I really do think it's that fundamental. And I don't mean to be overly grand or overly alarmist, but Kevin McCarthy's the guy who accidentally told the truth about Benghazi, remember? Didn't that cost him the job once? I think I have that right.
You do.
When he said, the guy said, we're just trying to create problems for Hillary.
Same thing what I just got through saying about Al Gore and about people trying to tell people the truth. Society has reached a level that you want to punish these people rather than listen to these people or support these people or reward these people. Whenever we reach a level in society that we're doing this, we're reaching a level of doom coming near a neighborhood near you, just as the Walmart slogan.
But they've now gone to the most serious constitutional remedies as temporary weapons of war.
And Jonathan, we should point out, James Comer did the same thing in this case, saying out loud, look at Biden's poll numbers since we started this investigation.
Yeah, Representative Comer's done it. Senator Grassley has done it. There have been a number of Republicans who have showed their cards and basically said this is a political play. And Speaker McCarthy, we note that he seems to be owned by the far right of his party. He's also someone that Donald Trump referred to as my Kevin for years and never pushed back on that either. So John Mitchell, you say that, I mean, we are seemingly in a new place here. Are there moments in history that you can compare this to in terms of an impeachment push, something that's supposed to be so grave, so rare, so serious, but a party held and pushed back against the fringes and said, no, we're not going to do this. And yet this time McCarthy is seemingly unable to do that.
No, I mean, the politics of impeachment in the major cases, you can always find, a precedent for what you're looking for. The radical Republicans started trying to impeach Andrew Johnson in December of 1865. But the fact that that's the precedent, Reconstruction, Civil War, is deeply disturbing. And I think that, sure, there could be a backlash. It may be that our analogies to the 1990s are pointless at this juncture. I think one of the things we all have to be careful about, or at least I'll speak for myself, what I feel I have to be careful about in talking about this is, I think one of the problems at this hour is folks like us, totally understandably, still speak as if there's a conventional reality, as if gravity works, as if, the stars are somehow still in alignment, and they're really not. Right? Donald Trump was president of the United States and tried to overthrow the government of the United States. And then we fall back, understandably, on, well, did Biden have a good week or a bad week? No, that's not really the question anymore. The question is, are you for the Constitution or are you against it? And I don't think this week is going to make that conversation any saner.
Coming up, one of our next guests is not ruling out a possible third-party run for president. We will talk to Andrew Yang, who ran for the White House as a Democrat in 2020, just ahead on Morning Joe.
That's the part that I continue to keep saying, that if there's ever been a time that a third party needed to step in, an independent, a Tea Party, a Ross Perot, to break away from both of these parties that have made such of a mess. I mean, you've got to be honest with yourself that the union that wanted to come to the South and defeat the South, that said this is the way that we're going to eat, and this is the way the cow's going to eat the cabbage. Well, we went along with that for now over 150 years. And look at what it's got us. It's got us total chaos. It's got us failure. It's got us choking one another. It's got us compromising on issues and not willing to conform on others. It has got basically the very wrath of God that has opened up the pits of hell upon to us in one form or another. And if we're not willing to open up our eyes and awaken from this stupor that we're in, we're only going to get more of it, and it's only going to intensify. Regardless it comes in the form of gun violence, regardless whether it comes in the form of fentanyl, regardless of what form it may come, it's going to come near a neighborhood near you, just as the Walmart slogan. You can see the handwriting on the wall. And if you're not willing to conform, then basically you deserve to get what you got. Just as my grandmother used to always tell us boys that if you make your bed hard, you're the one that's going to have to sleep in it, buddy. You know, there comes a time that you can no longer turn your head and plead the fifth or plead insanity. There comes a time that reality has to basically knock you down, or a mountain gets created in your life that you have to start looking at other alternatives other than looking at false alternatives or fake alternatives or bad alternatives. That's what we've been doing now for 30 plus years, since somebody beginning at the White House decided to make a decision for all of us. White man speaketh with forked tongue in putting us where we are today, that as far as I'm concerned, that body, that cabinet of people that was engaged in the latter part of Ronald Reagan's administration and the beginning part of the Bush's administration has still not been given accountability. They stuffed their pockets full. They done well for themselves. They grow. They become very powerful, and then they went off into the shadows. Some of them went to different countries. Some of them has big elaborate homes. They're now reaping the benefits of being bogus and being part of the problem rather than the solution to the problem. And to this day, they still haven't been put on the hot seat as far as accountability. And that's one of the reasons why America has failed the way that it has, is because we have become too biased. We have allowed for all this stuff to occur in our lives, and everybody said, well, it'll get better. It'll be all right. We'll make it up the next time. Oh, really? Will we? Have we?
We've said this, but this could have been worse. This could have ended differently. And this ended with no loss of life, relatively peaceful. Yes, you know, the community was in fear for quite a while. But boy, you got to think about, you know, what these guys have seen, you know, in their careers. It doesn't always end like this.
No.
You don't always get to stand up at a podium and, you know, think, okay, we did it. Yes, it took a while, and yes, we were up against all odds, but we got it done. We got him. He's back in custody. A convicted murderer 2 times over. He's back in custody and no longer roaming around in communities with families and children. And, you know, really gripping the whole area in fear. This story got national attention, rightfully so, because 2 weeks on the run, that is a long time.
That's right.
For an escaped murderer to be out there.
With Cavalcante crab walking his escape between 2 walls up onto the roof and then outside the Chester County Prison, made his way to Longwood Gardens. From there, the perimeter moved multiple times. There's the crab walk on the top left-hand corner of your screen. This is someone who's 5 feet tall, so smaller in stature, probably difficult to see, difficult to find.
Thank God they finally caught that monster that has done this. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. I like the way the building looks right there. It looks like a cross, don't it? Good luck to all of us as we in this program are saying, God bless America, God bless our troops. May heaven please help us all in regards towards the major decisions that's going to have to be made in the future towards where we go as a whole. Not just as part of a whole, but as a whole, to making not just our great nation, but the world a much better, safer, more prosperous place for us all to live in. Thanks again. God bless and shalom.